Joan by Carol M Mottershead. Chapter 24. Eventually, Punchinella got bored of doing manual labour. He wanted to get back into acting. It had been years since he had tried anything different with the troupe. Noticing how popular my puppet shows had become, and how many puppeteers up and down the country were now copying my shows, with a Punch and Judy show at almost every seaside resort, he decided to revive an interest in commedia dell'arte, a parody of one of my shows using real people instead of puppets. It would be a challenge, but Punchinella wasn't one to be put off by a challenge. He toured the new show for months up and down the country, thoroughly enjoying working again, adding a few twists and turns of his own to my stories, even leaving Mr. Punch out of the story on one occasion. It didn't work, though. How could you think that Punch and Judy without Mr. Punch would be acceptable when everybody knows that there is no show without Punch? Laughed Nicholas. It wasn't long after they'd performed the show without Punch when Nicholas came across a publication that contained a letter written by a German prince to his beloved, telling her about a street theatre play that he had seen whilst journeying in England in 1826. He showed it to Punchinella. The article wasn't very flattering. Punchinella became furious. It had been a long time since I'd seen him that angry. Why, after all this time, did it matter, I thought, then remembered the time I'd read the passage from Pepys's diary and could only sit and listen as a tirade of expletives left his mouth. The prince had died years ago, but Punchinella wouldn't listen to reason. He stormed off. We all knew where he'd end up, and knew too well what state he'd be in when he returned. Nicholas and I went to bed early. We wanted to be asleep before he returned. A few hours passed before he arrived home. I'd heard him noisily arrive home, then thud. I came downstairs to check on him. He was asleep where he fell, totally out, for now. I tried to get back to sleep. I can't live like this, I thought. We have an eternity to live together. I swore the vow of till death us do part. But what happens when there is no death? I didn't know what I was going to do. I needed to seek help. Someone. Somewhere. Where was that John D? I was constantly arguing with myself in my mind. I accepted Punchinella worked hard, but he played just as hard. Every show he'd have a drink to unwind. Every meeting with a new playwright he would share a drink with them, then have a drink to unwind. After. There was always an after. Always an excuse being used. Drinking as he did was getting him a bad reputation amongst potential patrons. They didn't want to work with him. He was becoming unreliable. Plus, the popularity of commedia dell'arte and mime was dwindling. Touring the theatres was no longer viable, and the troupe returned home. I found myself taking on more work every week. Not necessarily because we needed it anymore, but because it kept me out of the house, now Punchinella was home. He needed something else to occupy his time. He started following me to the seaside for the day when I was performing. "You gave Mr. Punch quite a wallop with that frying pan today, Judy," he said one day as we were walking away from the booth. "Well, I had to make it look realistic," I said defensively. "Has someone upset you, Judy?" he asked. "No more than usual," I replied. "Well, I think you hit him a bit hard that time. I thought you were supposed to be warning the children that being violent was naughty, not encourage them to hit him," he laughed. "I do, but occasionally I get carried away in the moment, so to speak. Besides, you shouldn't tease baby like you do. And for giving the dog the sausages. Well, it just annoys me so much sometimes. But it's only a show, Judy. Only puppets in a show. They're only bits of wood, he laughed. They may be only bits of wood to you, but they're my friends, I told him petulantly. Only puppets representing your friends, Judy, he tried to calm me down. Well, it's you, Punchinella, I shouted. You irritated me this morning, whistling that silly tune about the seaside. I love the seaside, but why did you have to be so chirpy first thing in the morning? I've been up all night nursing the dog after he ate those sausages you gave him. Sausages? Now you're complaining that I gave him our sausages, even though they would have made us ill if we'd eaten them, and the dog's been ill instead? Make your mind up, woman. Would you rather it was me and you who ate bad sausages? I'd rather you got rid of the sausage machine altogether, I argued. It's been nothing but trouble since we got it, I complained. Caused trouble? How? Asked Punchinella. Well, do you remember when you nearly put our dog into the sausage machine? That was an accident, and it was years ago, said Punchinella. An accident, maybe, but you never concentrate on what you're doing, throwing things into the machine without looking at what you're picking up. That's not the way to do it, I yelled. And so the argument went on. Nicholas had gone to fetch ice cream during the break, and as he was returning, he had noticed the audience watching Punchinella and I arguing. The audience had been laughing, he told us later. They obviously found your conversation amusing, since they were listening quite intently, reported Nicholas. I was mortified. Now look what you brought us down to, arguing in public. I feel so ashamed. I don't know how I'm going to face working in that resort again. Punchinella, on the other hand, listened to what Nicholas was saying and had an idea. Why not keep it as part of the show? Why not make mock-up behind the scenes, backstage arguments between the shows, he said. What a brilliant idea, Nicholas, my lad. You're not just a pretty face, he said, and off he went into his writer's mode.